I think the most important thing throughout all of this is the idea of knowing that you have a voice. But more importantly than that, I think having your own opinions, being able to have fully formed or even partly formed opinions is so important.
Welcome to Platform Z, or Z, whichever you prefer. Join me, Noah Lennon, as I speak with my generation about a range of topics and themes in the present day. Salutations! Thank you for tuning in to the 9th episode of the podcast. Today I'm speaking with a special individual. He's multifaceted, a young historian, a young politician, a model, a grade 8 classically trained singer, a grade 8 pianist, a grade 4 violinist, and a grade 4 cellist. Sorry, what? Leave some instruments for the rest of us, bro. He's in his third and final year at UCL, University College London, studying towards a Bachelor of Arts degree in history, and has recently just completed a summer internship at Friends of the Ocean, a new charitable organization working to bring ocean conservation into mainstream politics. He's one of my oldest and longest friends, and is possibly the first ever friend I made. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the multi-talented, prudent and generous soul, Edmund Irving.
Thank you for such a lovely introduction. Hello, guys. Can't really say anything else apart from thank you very much, Noah.
Of course. So, as you may have seen from the title, today's episode is on political education. We'll be discussing the value of having a political education, Eddie's political work, young people, and everything in between. Eddie, would you like to start us off by explaining what a political education means?
Sure. I see political education as the activity of educating and informing people, whatever age, whatever background, of everything that's kind of involved in politics with their lives and kind of the wider world. And I think the key facet of that is by encouraging and informing kind of people to engage in politics. That engagement can be anything in terms of being a member of a party, speaking up, signing petitions, being a member of a trade union, anything possible. Just the idea of, contributing to, what I think means so much for all of us in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. What sparked your interest in political education or politics more broadly, wherever you want to take that question?
Sure. I think for me, it started in, just seeing the news when you're really, really young. You kind of just see these headlines come across and you're curious as to what they mean and the significance they have on you. And then I think for me specifically, I was actually really lucky, to do politics at A level in school. I know it's taught in some schools and some don't do it, but I think it's, in my opinion, it's essential, at least maybe even at like a GCSE level. I think it allowed in how they teach it to teach you about the institutions that have always been set up in this country, Parliament, House of Lords and Commons, and then the executive in terms of the Prime Minister and what they do, and then also the judicial system, which I think is something which impacts all of us even more in terms of everyday laws. And I found it really interesting to know what our rights are as citizens and the debates around those. And then I think also at that A level, it allowed me to kind of see it from a global perspective. In year 13, in my last year of school, I was able to study like US politics, which I think is as much like an education right now as it is like a soap opera in terms of everything going on now is completely unreal, to be honest. And having a basis, both like theory-wise and what should be happening at least in America and the UK versus what's actually happening now and the debates around that, I find it really interesting. And I think the final thing I'd say as well, as part of that course, such a good course, was the idea of ideologies being taught, like what is liberalism, what is socialism, what's conservatism, environmentalism, feminism, and anarchism, and kind of the real strands, different strands within each ideology, how they intersect, the key thinkers around them. And some people may think that that kind of stuff sounds really boring, but I think throughout history, I'm biased, and also today, there's a real relevance in terms of the extent to which the politicians today and the people representing us on the world stage and on the domestic stage have really deviated from where they stand. And that's why I think our conversation is so important and political education is so important, mainly because I don't think we've ever felt more detached from the people in government in like the last 20 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
This is a self-promotional break.
Yes, my people, this is another quick reminder that I'm raising money for War Child UK as part of the Rising competition with Hotbox. You can donate and check out my full performance linked down below in the description. The page will close in 1 week, so please do donate whilst you still can. Thank you for all of your support, as always. Love. Thank you. Do you know Gary's economics?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking about him before this episode. I was thinking about how he's become almost this political force now, where he's building quite a fan base with his videos and his idea of tax wealth, not work. I saw he has t-shirts now.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, he's really interesting. I think in that absence of people that we really tap into politically, and then I think that gulf, people try to fill it from the far right, whether you see a far right or anything, with the voices, your Andrew Tates, your Tommy Robinsons in this country. I then think that whether far left or left, I'm not saying Gary Economics is either one of these, because he approaches it from very much more of a spectatorial point of view, in terms of he likes to comment from an economic, but also like a personal standpoint. I think having these voices outside of politics is really important because it allows people to really tap in a digital age.
Yeah, no, I love what he's doing as well. I think his videos are very informative for somebody getting into politics, and it is such a different world when you hear about it, and the people that are in these seats in governments and in these rooms making these decisions. It's like you're never really taught about that in school, to be honest. I was never taught about that, and we didn't have any politics to study as a subject, so it is such an important thing for young people to actually discover and get their, how do I say it? Yeah, get their hands into it. I don't know, get stuck in.
Yeah, get stuck in. And whatever stuck in means for each individual person is obviously different. I'm not going to go out and say that I'm the most active person or the most active voice, but I think having knowledge first and then the ability to act second, I think is pretty foundational. And I think especially at a time where, we're living in a time of war, like wars in Europe, major conflict, and really deteriorating conditions, and what's been a very brutal aspect of the war in the Gaza Strip. It's a real time of like immense tension, and I think knowing where you stand, I think the most important thing throughout all of this is the idea of knowing that you have a voice, but more importantly than that, I think having your own opinions, being able to have fully formed or even partly formed opinions is so important, because Lord knows if you don't have those opinions, watching these things kind of unravel in front of you, you're just going to get swept up in changes you didn't want to happen in the first place.
Yeah, and a common viewpoint I hear quite a lot is that it doesn't affect me, so I don't need to care. But actually, these things do affect us, even from a economical standpoint, in what you're buying in the supermarket and the imports and the way that your country is tied to the country that's at war potentially, or in this position of power in some political tension. So I definitely do encourage young people to not separate themselves from these things. It is good to, like you said, have that voice, but also to educate yourself and find out more. And there's a lot of mob mentality as well that you see nowadays, especially because of social media, where people run with a certain narrative, and actually it's so important to research properly and educate yourself properly and make your own judgment. These are things
100%.
That,
I think you're completely correct. I think the idea of very much getting swept up in like the narrative, and whatever narrative that is, I think one thing I think we're being very careful of being is very unbiased in what we're talking about. But I think that's pretty natural, because I think political education doesn't come with any prerequisites or precautions as to where you should stand or anything. It's more giving you the ability to stand on your own 2 feet, I think is really important. And I think getting swept up by the tides of like the media and the manipulation of the media, whether that's social or national news coverage, I think it's very, very easy just to kind of let these things unravel while you just watch on the sidelines. And I think that phrase you mentioned in terms of, it doesn't affect me, I think that phrase becomes harder and harder to defend as the weeks this year go by and as the years have gone on, because not least with COVID and the impact of Brexit and anything and the wars that have been going on. I think it's really, really essential, I think, to have that perspective, and more than a perspective, have your own vision. You're not having to look through a prism of a potentially biased news source, because it's very difficult to navigate your way through that. But I think another point that leads on from that, as well as those sources of news, is not just reading one. And I think a key part of political education in terms of the actual actions that I would want to speak about is everyone has 5-10 minutes just to go on to, let's say, like BBC News and see what's going on. But let's say having I think a plurality of viewpoints is really important, because that's what allows you to make your own opinions. You can't just read your news just off one source, and you want to hear opinions from people as well as just what's actually going on. Listen to let's say The Rest is Politics. I think it's a really brilliant podcast and has been for years now. And let's say if you're going to read The Telegraph, read The Guardian, and vice versa. If you're going to read The Times, read The Sun, read anything. But I think I've always found myself reading The Guardian and The Telegraph to kind of see where I stand. If you're a university student, you have free access to these newspapers. Activism has become, I think, more prevalent in our generation, and I think that's a really good thing. Obviously, there are different kinds of activism. There are good and bad kinds. I think that's objectively speaking. But yeah, the ability to form your own opinions, I think, is one of the most essential skills you can have as a young person, whether that's work in kind of the workplace, in social spaces, in relationships. And politics is just a facet of that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I love how you touched on university there and having access to those sources, because one thing that university is extremely good at, that I'm very grateful for, is the research element, and actually being taught how to research and how to reference and how to find sources. And that is so important in an age where information is available everywhere, and that information can be correct or it could also be incorrect, especially with AI now, the rise of AI, and how people trust AI more and more now, even though it could be potentially spouting out misinformation. So it is really important that university allows you access to those sources and that you do learn to research properly. And that leads me on to my next point, which was on the note of you studying history at UCL. I wanted to know a bit more about and find out a bit more about how your time at university has impacted your thoughts, your ideas, your political education, and how politics has come into play with your degree.
Definitely. It's a really good question. I think history and politics do go hand in hand. And obviously at university, I've loved it. Obviously, I'm from London, decided to stay here. I don't regret it at all. I've been able to have the independence, and I think the level of education I've been getting from the uni has been really good, and I've been loving it. Obviously, it's my final year. Catch me in February. I won't really be saying that once I'm kind of bogged down by a dissertation, but it's been really brilliant, and I'm loving it. But I'd say with history, the main thing I found at university is that idea of kind of reading against the grain and understanding things against the traditional narratives, or let's say not traditional per se, but the narratives and the idea of history and progression through time that have become the dominant, and maybe more than dominant, like the sole narrative of the past. And that's not necessarily changing facts, but I think it's looking at facts differently from a different angle. We speak at uni a lot about like top-down history, kind of the history of big names, kings and queens, obviously mainly men, and focus from like a very Western perspective. But then through my studies, it's been really important, and I've found it really, really interesting in a very objective way to widen your kind of depth of understanding, not be taught different things per se, but also to kind of widen your lens, like reading about the stories of working class people in Britain instead of just thinking about those who are running the empire or something. And it's that idea of perspectives, and the fact that people have had really valuable perspectives on the unfolding of history, both micro history in terms of the goings on of their daily lives, and macro history in terms of the big activities of these kind of nations, how nations are formed and everything. And I think that idea of perspective and people's individual thoughts and how they've recorded those thoughts and how those thoughts have been passed down like orally or by rote, it's really interesting. And I think I'm studying China for my final year, and that idea of like the public sphere in terms of the people and the government, and then the private sphere in terms of the diaries of these individuals and how they coped and processed the political changes going on. It's so interesting. And I say in times of whether it's crisis or peace, stability or tension, I think just not necessarily noting it down, but it's taught me very much the idea of every opinion has immense value, and a debate is so important in comparison just to hearing just one thing, one form of history, one form of what's going on today and politically, instead of having a plurality of viewpoints and perspectives and voices. I think it's really, really important. That's definitely been the most interesting part of it for me.
Makes me want to study history at UCL now. So interesting about perspectives. I love that.
As young people today, I think like with exactly what you're saying about AI, and I'm not here to necessarily be like crazy anti-AI, but I do think the idea of there being such an emphasis on those kind of aspects of our lives today and the science and the maths parts, obviously it's so important and it's so brilliant and there's such valuable courses to be taught. But when I am then asked like why history, I think like the level of interpretive and like analytical skills it gives you to process things in a very informed way. And it's not as if I don't feel like I'm speaking from kind of a moral high horse or an intellectual high horse when I say any of these kind of things that I'm saying. But I think it's the fact that I've been able to hear a lot of different voices, and I've been very grateful to hear a lot of different voices, which allows me to feel a lot more assured in what's coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, that's evident as well, you know. It's great to hear you talking about these things because a lot of people are afraid to say the wrong thing, especially now. And you have cancel culture and more pressure in terms of social media and social status. Everyone is careful where they tread and where they step. So it's so important having a voice like you giving these balanced views and enabling young people to actually take a step in.
I think especially because of that, just one final point I'd add, and I appreciate that. The last thing I'd touch on that point is the fact that we should never take for granted, I think, the fact that we're able to formulate these opinions. We're able to access this information. Yes, it can be tainted, but we also have very different viewpoints we can access from a variety of very like reputable, like legitimate sources of information. And throughout history, even today, so many countries all around the world, you aren't able to formulate your own opinions, let alone express them. And I think that is a right that in this country and in others, I think people really forget and take for granted. It's something I'm very passionate about in terms of if we have the ability and the resources completely for free to be able to access these opinions and to formulate them ourselves. I think it would be pretty shocking if we didn't feel like it's a right that we should enjoy in that kind of way because so many other people can't.
Yeah, so valid. It is really important to remember that, and we are fortunate to have that luxury, have that privilege of independent thinking. Let's move on to the platform, Zed. Quickfire questions. Are you ready, Eddie?
I guess so, yeah.
What was the most recent thing that inspired you?
Oh, good question. I know these have to be quickfire, but I'm not sure. I was able to do a gig recently, and being able to see my family turn up and really show their support alongside all of my friends from home, from university, my girlfriend and everything. It was so nice, and that kind of inspired me very much to kind of keep doing what I want to do in terms of the fact that there's always that network there of people that really care.
And I would have been there, but I had a gig on the same day. So I couldn't go. I would have been there.
Likewise, but that's okay. We'll have many more.
Yeah, exactly. What is your goal for this month?
Enjoy my 21st, which is tomorrow, and then really get down to business and lock in terms of where I want to be in a year's time, have an idea of that, and yeah, do myself proud in this final year.
Great. What's one bad habit that you need to get rid of?
Procrastination. I think everyone has it to a degree, but I think it's something which I know I just need to get off my phone, man. I think I just need to like lock my phone away and really get down to business, and that's not just academic, just in all aspects really. There's nothing stopping us. We have a finite time, so I think making the most of it is the most important thing.
Come on. What does joy look like to you?
Tottenham winning the Europa League, quickfire, bang, and I don't know, being around all my friends. Very much that.
When have you felt the most love?
There's so many different kinds of love. I'd say I'm very lucky. I live with my girlfriend. We've been going out for a year and a half now. And yeah, I'd say just every day I've been with her, to be honest.
Lovely. Last question. What's the one thing you'd change in today's society?
One thing I could change, I would say, yeah, go on then. I'll link it to what we've been saying today. I think that we should have one, let's say, free period in all school lessons. It should be something about politics and something about like our rights and where we stand and everything. Like a little idea of politics to keep the young people really informed and engaged and let them be let out into the world to kind of think what they want to think instead of other people.
I agree wholeheartedly. Well, that's the end of another episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you could take some things from this. Thank you so much, Eddie, for your time, for coming on and sharing your knowledge. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely. It's always lovely to catch up.
Of course. Please take a moment now to tell the listeners where they can find you, what you've got going on, what you've got coming up.
You can find me on Instagram, the same name, LinkedIn, in terms of jobs, plug that in. And yeah, hopefully I think after uni, I'll be wanting to do more internships in this kind of field, be very active in this kind of thing. And then, yeah, maybe work in government in some sort of way, shape and form. But no, it's been lovely. Really, really appreciate it. And this podcast is brilliant. So we'll see you. I'll be tuning in very soon.
Thanks, Eddie. And that will all be linked in the description below.
Lovely.
Great. Take care, guys. Thank you. Goodbye.
Peace.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.